everybody. Welcome to Skeleton Keys.
I'm Torri and John.
And I'm John Booker.
And together, we're going to try to unlock the mysteries of mythology and history in pop culture.
Torri, we have something today that I never thought I would be talking about on a podcast, but I'm so delighted to be talking about it. We have entered into new territory for academic, scholarly people such as ourselves. We are going to take on something that is so mythic that it should be included in every discussion of mythology, in my opinion. What are we talking about today?
Oh, we are talking about the juggernaut that is The Bachelor, specifically Bachelor in Paradise.
Woo!
Yes, it's happening, y'all. It's happening.
Torri, it's so funny because when you and I first talked about doing a show on Bachelor in Paradise, I thought, okay, I'm an open-minded person. I'll check it out. I'll watch a couple of episodes and be ready. Can have this conversation about mythological connections. And here I am 3 seasons deep in Bachelor of Paradise because I've gotten hooked. I got so invested in this show, and I still am.
I don't know how they do it. And when we were talking about this, I'm going to be honest, y'all, don't Bachelor Nation, don't come and hate me. I was kind of disparaging. I was like, what? Bachelor? Y'all, I have looked up these people. I'm following them on social media. I care about their kids. Like, I'm committed to, I'm a member of Bachelor Nation now. It sucks you in.
It does. It really, really does. And it's easy to think, well, yeah, it sucks the worst part of you in, that it's just low-hanging moral fruit. But honestly, there's some really wonderful storytelling. There are some amazing, shall we say, motifs that get created. And there are some super engaging people that I can't help but become very curious about. Now, Torri, full disclosure, I've worked in reality television before. I know a bit about how the sausage is made. I know that when we talk about reality television, I've had a front row seat to how much of it is reality and how much of it is manipulated by producers. I understand all of that. And I don't care.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. All of that just doesn't matter to me. I'm just so invested in these people, in these characters, in this show. It is just a compelling Grecian drama of the highest order.
But I mean, you're being serious in that this is what it feels like. This is like a historically, like these really epic tales of love and deceit and hate are being expressed on The Bachelor at a Mexican resort. We've been intrigued by relationships and how they all go down, even the dating game. We can go back to that.
Yes.
But The Bachelor has been on, and The Bachelorette and every other iteration has been on since 2002.
Yeah.
Has 30-something seasons. Like, there's something enduring here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's those stories that are told, those motifs, those characters that continue to pop up and that we continue to connect with.
Well, and if you take a deep look at the way that they've taken those Bachelor shows from the 1970s and continued to perfect them, if you look at what they've done with Bachelor in Paradise, I would suggest it partially is thanks to the mythological motifs and the ritualism that they've adopted in the show that I think is making it more successful. This idea of the rose ceremony, this ritual of the rose ceremony at the end, what a mythological idea of I'm going to give a rose to the person that I choose. The archetypes in these various characters that we see, there are villains, there are Aphrodite type figures, there are Hera type figures, there are Ares type figures, there's Dionysus, there are tricksters. It's like the entire mythological family showed up on this show. And just like with Greek mythology, you may start reading a story and not know all the backstory on what happened between Dionysus and Persephone in another myth. But in this story, the two of them are doing this. And it's sort of the same way with Bachelor in Paradise. All these people have been on other Bachelor-related shows, and they've come on Bachelor in Paradise with those backstories. But you don't have to have read those other myths that they were a part of. You can jump right in and be engaged in this story that they are a part of now.
And it's interesting because I never watched The Bachelor. We're specifically discussing Bachelor in Paradise season 1. So I didn't know any of these people before watching it. But the way that the show is structured, when each person comes on, they're described, or their past story is described in a way where you almost immediately know their archetype.
Yes. Yes.
Like there's a character, Callan, who comes on, and you're like, I don't like this dude. This dude's I don't like him. And they paint him like that. All the other characters are, oh, yes, Callan's here. And I don't know this man from Adam. He could be a great human. But you get right into that archetype of like, this is the bad guy.
Yeah.
He can't be trusted.
Well, archetypes, they in some ways are connected to the work that's been done around dream theory, where many psychologists would say when you have a dream, every character in your dreams is you. It's some aspect of who you are, some piece of who you are that's working itself out. And when you begin to look at your dreams that way, your dreams start to become much more interesting when every character is some version of you, some aspect of you. And I think the same is true with The Bachelor, especially Bachelor in Paradise. I see myself in every one of these characters, and I see every one of these characters is some aspect of me. So I think one interesting way to look at Bachelor in Paradise is that this Mexican resort that they're at is like my brain. It's like my head. And all of these different archetypes and characters are mingling and falling in love with each other and doing battle with each other. And it's just this petri dish microcosm of what's happening psychologically inside of us all the time.
I found myself at the beginning of watching the season judging them, judging everyone, just being like, why would they do this? By the end of the season, I loved all of these people, even in their mistakes. Yeah. And I think it does come from like that dream theory of like, you see yourself, you see how that person could have made that deduction. You see how they could have come to that conclusion or felt that way about someone. It brings you back to mistakes you've made in your past, or at least it did for me. Yeah. So you, in a weird way, love all of these characters because you recognize them.
Well, speaking of mistakes we've made in our past, we offer a service on this show. We offer a skeleton and a key. A skeleton from our own closet, a story, something that has been maybe a moment we're not that proud of, but we bear our humanity on this podcast. And we offer later a resource, something that's been helping us out. So, Torri, would you be so kind as to offer us a skeleton from your closet today?
Well, you know what? We'll keep this in the dating world. Well, I'll just talk about one of my worst dates.
Okay. All right.
I was out of college. I was grown. Went on a date with this guy, and we were just talking. And he asked what my major was. And I said, oh, I have a degree in Africana studies. And he goes, oh, so how do you feel about, he was a white male, of white men saying the N-word?
Oh,
and I was like,
no.
One, we're at dinner. Why is this being brought up?
Oh.
I think he wanted to get into an argument with me because I told him what my degree was in.
Oh.
Anyway, I was like, not a fan of that.
Yeah.
Not a great choice on your part.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, then rappers shouldn't say it. And he started talking about like Big Boy.
Oh,
this is the first date, John. This is the first date. I don't even think we had our appetizers yet. And I'm like, why is this something that we're talking about?
You know, sometimes it's just better to know right up front who someone is so you don't have to waste time.
Yep. Save me time because that date ended quite quickly. Quite quickly. I was like, I'm good.
Oh, man. Torri, on behalf of men and specifically white men, I am so sorry you had to put up with that. That's terrible.
It's not all of them. Just that one guy. Who thought that was appropriate to say?
Well, I too have a skeleton from a moment that is, something that is not my proudest moment, but I offer it today as a cautionary tale for everyone. Many people who know me well know that one of the very first jobs I had here in Los Angeles was working in reality television. And I specifically got to be a production assistant on a TV show that was popular at that time called Flavor of Love.
Classic.
And for those unfamiliar with Flavor of Love, it is a variation on The Bachelor, where rapper Flavor Flav is the bachelor. And he has all these women living in this house who are vying for his affections and also getting in disagreements with each other in vying for his affections. And working on this show, I had a number of experiences that are not my proudest moment, but one of those experiences happened the very first day that I was working on Flavor of Love. And one of the contestants had vacated her bowels.
What?
And someone needed to clean it up. And when you're a production assistant, that's the kind of jobs you get. That's the kind of things you are responsible for. And there's even a brief mention of this vacating of the bowels on the show. This is something
how can you not?
Yeah, believe me, they were not going to miss this opportunity to bring this into the show. But somebody had to then clean that up. And that somebody was this guy.
Oh my gosh.
Torri, I'm so thankful for that moment, actually, because I knew sitting there as I was doing that cleaning work, that there's nowhere to go but up from here. I'm literally starting at the bottom of the barrel. You can't get any lower than that. And so every job that I got in Hollywood after that, every time that I was able to make a career advancement, I often thought about where it all started. And that was with me and a piece of poo on Flavor of Love. And that is a skeleton from my closet.
That gives a whole new meaning to start it at the bottom. Now we're here.
There's just so many jokes that can be had in this moment. And the first year or two after it happened, it was difficult for me to find all the humor in it. But now,
understandably,
now I've found quite a bit of humor. And speaking of things that you have difficulty laughing at, there are a few aspects of the show that I think we have to call out because they're not okay. And just as with many of the myths, things that happen in myths that are not okay, we have to call it out. Zeus is womanizing, and when rape occurs and things like this in mythology, we have to call it out. We can't just write it off. And one of the things that, especially with the first season of Bachelor in Paradise, is this is the least racially diverse cast of people on television at the time in history, I believe.
It was shocking to see. And mind you, this is 2014?
Yeah.
I think is when it came out. And in all fairness, the Bachelor franchise has not been known for diversity. It's not really well known for it. But I was shocked.
Yeah.
Because I'm watching all these people come out. I'm like, okay, there's going to be a woman of color.
Right.
I'm waiting.
Right.
And
nope.
They're not coming out.
No. There's one African-American man in the entire first season of the show.
And there's a biracial woman or a lighter skinned Black woman who comes in for a hot minute.
Right. So literally like 30 seconds of the show. Also, it is the most blonde heavy show I've ever seen in my life. I could not believe that they just kept casting the same blonde woman over and over again. And Torri, this is to my shame. I'm embarrassed of this, but I sometimes throughout the season had trouble differentiating the blonde women. Sometimes they began to blur together for me. That's just me, but I had trouble with that.
There was one or two who I was like, which one is this?
Yeah.
And it was like the same color blonde.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it wasn't even like that's a platinum blonde. It was the same. It was like an assembly line.
Right.
They were getting off that boat.
Right.
Which I think from like a producing standpoint would not be wise. I would think you'd want to differentiate.
Yeah.
But they like the blondes on this season.
They do.
So if you're blonde, you felt very seen. A lot of representation for you.
You were very seen. They also on the show are a little bit fat shaming. One of the guys calls one of the other guys Fat Damon. And that guy is not fat. That guy is totally not fat. But even if he was, the fat shaming, not cool. On the plus, one more thing. This is definitely structured around a heteronormative framework. There's not, in the first season and not in any of the seasons I've gotten to yet, any sort of acknowledgement of anything other than heterosexuality as being part of people's experience. And here's where that's problematic. It's fine. I'm certainly lean towards the straight spectrum myself, but I believe sexuality is a spectrum. I don't know that anybody's ever 100% this or 100% that. Sexuality is a spectrum, and we all fall somewhere on that spectrum. And we may lean closer to one pole or the other, but there's very little acknowledgement of that spectrum of sexuality, of identity, of gender nonconforming ideals. So I think it's just important to name it and to call it out.
I wonder if they were thinking, oh, well, we can't define you if we can't put you into a box, because sexuality is a spectrum.
Yeah.
And I think people who are, especially in the LGBTQ community, don't feel like they need to necessarily choose a box if they don't want to, and they shouldn't have to. It's almost like the franchise of The Bachelor is looking down upon that. And we always know that the LGBTQ community is not given the rights. In that situation, I think what upset me the most is that LGBTQ people deserve to see their love and their experiences put on that big of a platform too.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for the day we get a bachelor or a bachelorette that can represent for all kinds of love.
Yeah.
So get it together.
You have to think that's not far away. You would hope.
Well, they started putting people of color in, so we're making progress slowly but surely.
Yeah, that's, wow, just sad. On the upside, I was impressed in the first season. They really pushed against ableism in a way that you don't always see on television. One of the characters, Sarah, I believe is her name, is someone who is very open about what happened with her arm. And she very beautifully describes the struggles that she's had in dating with dealing with this part of who she is that is differently abled. And so I love that they did that. I thought that was amazing, and that was a real step forward. I was rooting for her so hard during the show, and we're not going to give any spoilers here, but my love for Sarah ebbed and flowed throughout the season because of different things that happened. But that's good storytelling, and that's very mythic storytelling.
100%. And I like that she owned the story around it. It wasn't something that, to me, it felt like the producers weren't the ones who were dictating that story, that she dictated it from a standpoint of her full womanhood. Yeah,
yeah. Well, I'm very excited about the guest that we have coming to be with us today. Her name is Pamela Jaye Smith, and she is the author of Symbols, Images, Codes, The Secret Language of Meaning in Film, TV, Games, and Visual Media. She's going to be talking with us about some of the symbols that we see in Bachelor in Paradise, like the symbol of the rose, which again is a very mythological symbol. She's going to be talking with us a little bit about how a lot of these archetypal motifs between gods and goddesses chasing each other after their affections for love, where we've seen this throughout myth and history. And I am very, very excited for you to get to meet Pamela Jaye Smith. Pamela Jaye Smith, it is such a joy and a pleasure to have you on Skeleton Keys. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really looking forward to talking with you both.
Well, Pamela Jaye, I have been a fan of yours for some time. You wrote this book, Symbols, Images, Codes, The Secret Language of meaning in film, TV, games, and visual media. And I even remember the day I walked into Barnes and Noble and discovered that book, and I said, I have to have this. And I've read it a number of times since. And your work in mythology has continued to just be fascinating and an inspiration. And I really am so glad that you do the work you do at this intersection of storytelling and mythology. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in myth and symbol and things like that?
Oh, yes. Thank you. My first real introduction to mythology was in the fifth grade. And certainly we saw a lot of it and got exposed to a lot of it in fairy tales and Oscar Wilde's fairy tales for kids and grown-ups. But in the fifth grade, we had this wonderful teacher, and every day after lunch, she would have us come in and lay our little heads down on the desk, and she would read to us from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and she made the way through both of those books in that year. And I thought, these are great stories. They're so interesting. And I thought, I know a lot of these people. Like the kind of the breaking up families or the cheating spouses, or one of my favorites was the rigged beauty contest, because I'm from Texas.
Well, beauty contests actually really connect to our episode as we're talking about The Bachelor in Paradise. What do you mean when you say there's a rigged beauty contest in mythology?
Well, there are a number of them, but I think the one that, when I was first exposed to it, the one that stood out for me was when Paris, who they thought he was just a simple little herder, was actually a prince of Troy, kind of doing his field work, his gap year, whatever. And so the goddesses said, okay, who's the fairest of us all? We'll have a contest. We'll choose this guy, and he can decide. And Hera, the queen of the gods, offered him power. And Athena, the goddess of war, wisdom, and civilization, offered him wisdom. And as you know, Aphrodite said, I'll get you the most beautiful woman on the planet. Okay, he's a young guy. What do you think he's going to choose, right?
I love it.
It was kind of rigged, but hey. Now, I did come across something interesting. It's in a wonderful book, and I'll send you all links to these if you like, called When They Severed Earth from Sky. And you can also find it in other studies about matrilineal cultures and such. And that's the point that Menelaus had to go after Helen because she held the power, not him. It was like she was like Queen Elizabeth and he was Prince Philip. And if he didn't get her back, he was out of luck. He was just the consort. And that sort of gets glossed over after the patriarchal system begins to hold more sway. I thought that was very interesting, very interesting.
Well, we're discussing Bachelor in Paradise and myth. And it's interesting that you talked about matrilineal versus patriarchal cultures, because on Bachelor in Paradise, they switch. So one week, the men choose the women, and then the other week, the women choose the men. What is it about the choosing from a group of the opposite sex that resonates with people? Why is that so engaging to watch, just like those rigged beauty contests?
Well, I think it's deep within our evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology. And certainly for most of us in that mate-seeking mode at whatever age, even when it's little kids, who are you going to punch on the arm and who are you going to tease, or older people or everything in between, you're looking for certain things. We are wired to look for those who can, there's an interesting phrase for it called a resource acquisition and allocation. Who's got the resources, who can get the resources, and how are they going to distribute them? So in a patriarchal system, let's just say mid-century America is the most recent example for us, maybe, is women weren't working, the men were working. And if you wanted resources after the war, men came back and the women lost their jobs and were put into the homes. So if you wanted you and your children to be sourced and resourced, you had to find a man, and you had to get one who was a good provider. And for the man, it was presumably get a good breeder. And so, like you all were talking in your Aphrodite incarnated as Kim Kardashian episode, the exaggeration of the fertility body parts, symbols, they're symbols of, hey, I can make a lot of good babies. And it's kind of hardwired for that. What I find interesting is, and you see this in this selection process going on in Bachelor in Paradise, and you see it in animals. Look at the bowerbird, right? Look at the peacock. Now, and look at how many times it's the female that chooses the males, right? But often the males have to have this contest and knock their horns off and gore each other and whatever to be the alpha male, if you will. But there's always that shift in power, I think, is what made that interesting as they switched back and forth as to who was in power, who was doing the choosing.
Pamela Jaye, at the end of many of the episodes or throughout the course of the show, the person who is doing the choosing gives the other person a rose. And of course, roses, it's no secret here in our country, in the United States, at Valentine's Day or when someone wants to express love to someone else, they often give them roses. The rose is a really interesting symbol. And as someone who studied symbols, what can we learn from the symbol of the rose? What is the symbol of the rose?
It is a very interesting symbol because, like most symbols, there are multiple layers. And I think the most obvious one is there is beauty and there is danger. You've got the thorns, you got the beauty of the visual, and you've got the scent, and then you've got the thorns. And so that push-pull attraction of, gee, I really want that. That's gorgeous. Ouch, what am I going to have to pay for it? What is the cost going to be painting this thing? I think the rose says that very well. And also then it is symbolic because it does kind of look like female genitalia. And if you look at the cathedral windows in the Virgin cathedrals in Europe, particularly the ones that make up the path of initiation, that are placed, they're selected by their correspondence to the stars in the constellation Virgo. Those cathedrals have a rose window. And if you particularly go to the Chartres Cathedral and take a look, stand back from that big rose window, and they always faced west, by the way, and the masculine symbol of the cross was in the east. The rose window is often surrounded by two spires, which can look like the raised legs of a reclining woman. And then there is the rose, and there's the little entry portal, the doors into the cathedral. So in a sense, it is welcoming you into the mother goddess. It is saying, enter this place of creation. Enter this and be recreated. So it's part of that. I was very fortunate to study comparative mysticism with Georgia Lambert, who's a fabulous teacher, esoteric anatomy and philosophy and physics and metaphysics. And as she pointed out, and I find that we can do this in our stories, in our character development, as well as in our personal lives, there are typically 4 levels. And in any symbol, you want to see where does this lie on one of these or all of these 4 levels: the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual or creative planes. And so with those church windows, with those beautiful symbols that you get in so many of the temples and the holy sites, yeah, you got the physical, but then you also have that mating between hearts, between emotions. And then you have the mating of the minds. And if you're really lucky, you also get that connection on the spiritual level. And so the rose does that. And you find it showing up in many, many cultures, typically as the symbol for the mother goddess, whether it's the 5 petals, it's called the cinquefoil, 5 petals, actually, pentagram, which is a symbol for humanity. Think about Vitruvian man. Okay, we got one head, two arms, two legs, spread them all out, it makes a 5-pointed star. So they all kind of weave in together there with the rose symbol. And it can say so many things on so many levels.
You are taking me to church right now. Because honestly, I'm like, I want to snap like the old school. But when you're talking about the rose, this kind of gives a new meaning to the fact that they have a rose ceremony at the end. It's kind of an invitation with the rose is almost like an invitation to that mother goddess, that initiation of like, now you're allowed access by the giving of this rose.
Yes, yes. And if it's not freely accepted, you shouldn't go there. Because, no.
And do you think there's something to the fact that even when you watch the rose ceremony on The Bachelor in Paradise or any other iteration of The Bachelor, there's something very ancient about it?
Yes.
That resonates with people. Why do you think that still resonates even today?
I think this goes back to, if you will, spiritual evolution. You're familiar with the caduceus, the serpents twining up around the central column, which is symbolic of the spinal column, and these two energy streams, the Ida and the Pingala, that wind up along the chakras. And so you've got this male and this female, and they're crossing every place there's a chakra, except in humanity, and we've seen a lot of that these days. We've only come up to the solar plexus, but they're reaching for the heart. So this balance between the male and the female is, I think, often symbolized in the giving and the acceptance of a symbol of bonding. And you often find again, too, in a number of people's symbol systems, that at the top of that staff, at the top of that pole, will be a flower. Now, usually it's a pomegranate or a lotus, but a rose serves the same means to say a multi-petaled, multi-layered entity that is more than just one thing. And we get into this, then you've got all of these other wonderful levels going on. And you find a lot of that also echoed in Provençal, the troubadours' mythology and symbolism.
You mentioned a few moments ago some of the symbolism from astrology and from the astrological. And when we talk about Bachelor in Paradise or romance or the magnetic attraction of different people, of course, the astrological charts and things of this nature can naturally become some of the conversation. In your book, you talk some about some of the symbols that connect to the stars. And I just wonder if you'd be willing or open to share some of how you see the connection between the stars in astrology or those types of symbols in romance or human connection, attraction between people.
Oh, there's so many wonderful resources for relationship astrology. And who goes well with who, according to their signs, according to your moon sign, where's your Venus, where's your sun sign, what's your rising sign. And I think a lot of that can be very helpful for us when we're trying to sort through our own feelings. I think it can be a useful divination tool, just like the I Ching or the tarot cards, or tossing the sticks and bones. It's about helping you open up to trust more your own intuition and insights. Because so often we don't trust our own inner self. Well, because sometimes we aren't connected to anything higher, depending on the day or the time or the year, whatever. But I think it can be a very useful divination tool and a very useful self-help, psychologically speaking, tool. And as far as connecting, I think a thing to remember, too, is that astrological systems differ according to the culture. And some of them will have 13 signs of the zodiac, and some will only have 12, whether they are a moon-based or a solar-based system. So you get a lot of the different combinations. But I find the constellations more as carriers, symbols, if you will, carriers for stories, than as specifically symbolic of anything in particular.
Yeah.
For Scorpio, for instance, and here's a wonderful, the Rider-Waite deck of the tarot cards is quite good. But if you look at the Aleister Crowley Book of Thoth, that's really in depth. It gets into a whole lot more of the mystic background of all of these. But for instance, for the constellation Scorpio, the sign Scorpio, the Scorpion is the lowest level. At a higher turn of the spiral for that sign, it is the eagle. And at an even higher turn, it can be the phoenix. And this is what I noted too about in Bachelor in Paradise, they're doing a bit of a play on initiation rites. And we just talked about Scorpio, you've got the 3 levels. For the archepaths, now not any archetype in particular, any type can be on a path, the 5 paths of the warrior, the scientist, the magician, the clergy, and the lover. Each of those pathways to spiritual enlightenment has 3 levels. And anytime you go through any initiatory system, there is a ritual, and you are given something to signify that you have passed that test. So that whole ceremony of the giving of the rose is saying you are going from being an aspirant to someone who is together with someone. And I love that this stuff just comes intuitively to so many people. We just do it. And then when you start finding out the deeper stuff behind it, it's just fascinating.
You're blowing my mind, one, but I'm just like being taken to church. You're talking about the archetypal paths. The Bachelor in all of its iterations is known for having these archetypes within the people, of having the warrior, having the lover and the clergy. Why do you think these characters, but they're also real people going on this journey throughout these shows, why do we connect to them?
I think we are part of it is, and I don't mean this in a bad way, part of it is selfishness. We are trying to figure out who we are. Now, fair warning, in case you haven't noticed, it can be dangerous. If you do this too much, you can kind of drift over into narcissism, but we wouldn't want to say anything about current events or healthy, whatever.
I'll say it. We might be under the leadership in this country of someone who suffers from some of these issues.
Could well be.
Yeah, possibly.
But I think what we're trying to do, I love this phrase, and you can hear it a number of different places, but it's so beautiful. We're all just here to help each other wake up. And we need to find out who we are. And if somebody is exemplifying a quality that I want to develop, I'm going to pay attention to them. Or if they're exemplifying a quality I know that I want to get out of, like being the trickster on the magician path, right? The joker. I can learn something from them. I can learn from other people's mistakes. I can learn from other people's victory. And it can help me improve. And sometimes it's just sheer entertainment. But I think for a lot of us, it's, okay, would I want to be like that? Would I want a person like that?
Yeah. I have to echo, Torri, I feel like you're giving us a free college course right now. You realize this is a free podcast. I'm amazed at the jewels that you are offering to us in this talk. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, you've written more than one book, and you've really been someone who has articulated in words why different aspects of story are important. And of course, our myths are our stories. And I feel like that you've got insight through your work around the different aspects of storytelling into our current myths and our myths that keep appearing these days. I just wonder if you can comment a little bit on whether it's myths that you see in our current culture or whether it's myths that you see that keep reappearing. But I just feel like you have some insights to offer us along those lines.
Thank you. Yeah, there is maybe one day there'll be a book, but there is a presentation I do called Creating Our Next Mythologies. because we're always looking for, okay, what's the next myth? But a lot of the times it's just another iteration of one of the old ones, but modernized. And we need to keep telling the same stories because we need to learn these lessons. And one that I think we're seeing a lot now, and I can also see from what I have watched in Bachelor in Paradise, are some iterations of the myth of the wake-up call. And we see this in King Arthur, in Luke Skywalker, in Moses, in people who realize, oh, I have a destiny. I can do something. I can help, or I can become who I need to be. So that whole thing of the wake-up call is a myth that I think America as a country has been living out since it was born, or let's say forged, woven. People trying to figure out who they are. And the people who come to America, and let's also say refugees who go to any new country, whether you're going as a conqueror or a refugee or as a slave, you have to figure out who you are and how you can survive in that particular situation and culture. So the wake-up call is always important. And I think what some of the people seem to be learning on The Bachelor in Paradise is who they are, who they really are. And another of the mythic themes that is so prevalent is the search for the soulmate. And it's Romeo and Juliet, it's Pyramus and Thisbe, it's as old as matter and antimatter and protons and electrons and neutrons and the whole thing. It's about that duality and coming together to find the perfect match. So you've got that just built into the system. Another one I'd like to mention that is kind of parallel to and infuses these mythic themes is the concept of there being 3 levels of consciousness. And our job, we are told, is to evolve from tribal consciousness to individual consciousness to group consciousness. And America right now, and many countries right now, are stuck in tribal consciousness with an serious overlay of the dark side of individual consciousness. But so many people out there are really working on a group consciousness. You don't lose yourself. You don't lose your individuality. You encompass. And then the internet itself is a wonderful physical metaphor, physical symbol for that. Just because we're online together, you don't go away. You don't lose your individuality. But we are this little group. And then when people listen to it, it will be a larger. And I think we see that playing out around the planet right now. A lot of persistence on light. And whether or not we make, we will. How soon we make it and how easily we make it is up to us. And I mean that the capital U.S. I mean not the United States. All of us. And there's so many people doing such wonderful work on that, and ecology and dealing with the rich-poor gap and water and women's rights and Black rights. There's a lot of positive change going on.
Do you think we'll ever achieve that group consciousness? Do you think we're on the way that we'll actually make it?
I think we are, but I'm also kind of a cynical realist. And so, heck, maybe not. We may never see it, but what's going to be the next evolution after humanity? I wonder if the dinosaurs were sitting around talking like that. Who would have thought it would be those little creatures running through the grass, right?
Well, Pamela Jaye, it has been such an honor to have you on. And I wonder if you could tell people that would like to follow you and your work or check out your books, if you could tell us how we can more deeply engage with you and your work.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Well, you can go to the MythWorks website. 2 ways to get there, mythworks.net. That's MythWorks, as in mythology works.net, or PamelaJayeSmith.com. It'll take you to the same place. And then there we've got lots of articles. We have the archives of newsletters going back 5 or 6 years, maybe more. and ways to do story consulting or personal mythology consulting and speaker topics and all that. So, yeah. And then I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, but the website's probably the best place to start.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And we can't wait to have you back on to talk about something else because you are a fountain of wisdom. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you both. I really enjoyed it. And I liked the questions that you asked. You really went diving deep and expanding wide and high. Thank you both so much.
Pamela Jaye Smith, what an interesting individual.
Yes,
Such
I needed
wisdom.
that.
Yes, I needed that too. I love that Pamela Jaye is someone who has worked in so many different aspects of the film and television industry and has seen these symbols, these mythological motifs play out in so many different places, not just as a viewer in the audience, but as someone who has helped to create so many of these stories and someone who has been a resource to people wanting to come up in the industry, someone who's written books for people trying to learn about the industry. And speaking of resources and books, we have for the people a key. Every episode, we have a skeleton key. We bring you a key, a resource that is something we've been taking a look at, something that is interesting to us. And for me, Torri, I'm going to make it a little spicy here since it's the Bachelor in Paradise episode. I have recently read a book called Making Sex, Body and Gender from the Greeks to Freud.
Ooh.
And it's by Thomas Lacour. And it's excellent. It's wonderful. It is very academic. It's put out by Harvard University Press, but it really is it's a really interesting walk through how gender norms and our ideas about sexuality developed first from a mythic perspective and through the myths, and then all the way down through Freud. And the reason that the book connects the Greeks to Freud is that the connection there is psychology. So it's looking at the psychology of sex and how psychologically we have made sex what it is throughout different times throughout history. And it's just very well researched. It's very well executed. And I learned a lot. And I think it's especially applicable on this episode where we're talking about Bachelor in Paradise, because that is a show about love and sex, no doubt about it. And those things are key mythological ideas. And that is my skeleton key for this week. Torri, what did you bring for us this week?
I brought something that kind of made me very introspective. When we were going to talk about paradise, I wanted to kind of look up images of paradise. And I found a Thomas Kinkade painting, Stairway to Paradise. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, it's beautiful, as Thomas Kinkade paintings are. But I found myself having a very similar reaction to this painting that I originally had to even doing this episode, which was, everybody knows about Thomas Kinkade. Like, this is, everyone knows. And then I did a little digging into the man behind the painting. And he dealt with a lot of demons. There were a lot of things going on in his life that you wouldn't necessarily know just from looking at his paintings. A lot of pain, a lot of addiction. There were issues with that, a lot of issues with his faith. And I had to look myself in the mirror and see that I had made an assumption about this painting, about Bachelor in Paradise, that made me realize there was so much more depth to both of these than I had anticipated. And all of that was from just looking at this image of paradise through Thomas Kinkade's eyes. So that is my skeleton key. It kind of opened my eyes to my judgments that were not necessary or needed.
Incredible. If you had told me before this podcast began that somehow Torri would brilliantly link Bachelor in Paradise to a Thomas Kincaid painting, I would have called you a liar. But she's done it. She has absolutely done it. Amazing. Thank you. That was incredible. I'm so glad that you brought up this idea of paradise, because I don't think we can talk about Bachelor in Paradise without calling out this motif that this show is taking place in what is being labeled paradise, which again is an extremely mythological place, an extremely mythological motif and idea. Paradise is this place where love is created between these two people. But in a mythological sense, paradise is always something that must be departed. And it's usually something that people are kicked out of. When we think about the mythology of Adam and Eve, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is about them getting kicked out of paradise. And that's sort of what Bachelor in Paradise is about as well, is people getting kicked out of paradise. It's only at the very end that somebody actually makes it all the way through and gets to stay. Really, the core of the show is about people being kicked out of paradise, people being forced to leave paradise, which is, again, the mythology of Adam and Eve. So you've got this very Judeo-Christian myth that encompasses the idea of the show itself. Not to mention, we could probably do a whole nother show on how Bachelor in Paradise connects to Milton's Paradise Lost, because Paradise Lost seems to be weaving throughout different aspects of this first season. Even one of the guys on the show, when he has to leave, references Paradise Lost. So it's not lost even on some of the contestants, the people that are on the show, that there's this connection to this larger idea of what is perfection. We must depart from what is perfect and go back and live in the real world.
Yep.
I don't know. Any thoughts about that? Anything that strikes you about having to leave paradise to go back to the real world and how that connects?
I think it's one of those things, and you can kind of attest to this having been on the ground floor with reality shows, is that it is a little microcosm. You're not like, these people are actually not connected to the real world. And a lot of times I find, and maybe you can agree with me on this, especially when you're in love or you're in a story in your own life, you're in your own world.
Yeah.
And it's when you wake up and you're like, oh, there's other factors that are going to get in the way of this, or there are other people that are going to get in the way of this. That's when you wake up and you kind of get out of that paradise.
Yeah.
And so it just, to me, when they're all like, oh, it's back to the real world, I've felt that.
Yeah.
Like if there's a breakup, or if you've been with your family and you've kind of been safe and you're like, oh, back to the real world. And so I think everyone can kind of relate to leaving that and to understanding that nothing is going to be paradise forever.
You nailed it. That's exactly right. And I think that's why we have these myths about being kicked out of paradise and paradise being lost, because it's a universal experience. I think every single person has had some sort of experience where they felt like, wow, I have perfection. This relationship is perfection. This vacation is perfection. This place that I'm at with my job is perfection. And a week later, it's gone.
Exactly.
And that universal experience of loss is part of the human condition. It's not shocking to us that myths are gestating around this idea, and that they're describing our experience in this idea, because it is part of that universal human experience that we all, like it or not, are going to deal with. And I believe the Bachelor in Paradise always sort of ends with that hopeful place. You know, the end of the first season, again, no spoilers, but it ends in a place of hope. Even though the vast majority of everyone who's come through Bachelor in Paradise, their lives have been upended by this. This has not ended well for them. They've been kicked out of paradise. But it ends with that last little ray of hope. And I think that's also part of what makes us mythologically human, is that we cling to this last ray of hope and say, yes, all the evidence is stacked against me. And yet and still, somehow, I believe there's a chance. There's always a chance.
So The Bachelor and Bachelor in Paradise is kind of a story about hope.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I love that. And I love you for listening. If you're listening to this right now, we are so appreciative of you. And we would love to connect with you. There are a number of ways that you can connect with us. We are more than happy to receive email from you at our email address, skeletonkeyspodcast@gmail.com. Torri, where else can they get a hold of us?
You can also follow us on social media. We are at Skeleton Keys Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And then you can also follow us on our personal pages as well. I'm at Torri Yates Orr on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at John, JOHNKBUCHER on Twitter and Telling a Better Story on Instagram. We are so glad that you came and joined us. Thanks so much for listening. It would mean the world to us if you went to Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to this, leave us a review, leave us a good rating. That's how other people find us. Help us out. We would love it, love it, love it if you reviewed the podcast and gave us a good rating. So do us a solid. Do that for us. We would greatly appreciate it. Give us a rose. Torri, you came there at the end with the perfect button. Beautiful. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Skeleton Keys podcast with Torri Yates Orr and John Booker. Skeleton Keys is a production of Sideshow Media Group.